Welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is Asha Kothari Chaudhary and I'm a professor of English at Guwahati University. The course we are doing is Indian Writing in English, and the module we will now be looking at considers in English poetry written in India, how does history, nation and politics figure? Let us look now at the poems of Adil Jasawala. He, of course, is the most well known for his poem Missing Person, a voluminous exploration of identity and what it means to be an Indian with all the different kinds of underpinnings, contexts, histories in post-colonial India. Let us look a little bit at his life before we look at his poems, specific poems. Jasawala is born in Mumbai in 1940 into a Parsi family. His published works are Land's End, which comes in 1962, and the poem that I mentioned just a little while ago, Missing Person, came in 1976. His poetry is marked by a deep sense of irony, and it is consistent in exploring the reality of modern life in India, which is always fractured and fragmented. Jasawala's poetry is complex, fragmented, non-linear, and often ambiguous. It draws much of his inspiration from the work of people like T.S. Eliot. Missing Person is a benchmark work in capturing the hollowness and absurdity of the modern world, and Jasawala exceptionally fabricates the ideological significance and difficulty of actually forging an identity that is almost impossible in terms of fixity. He has also edited the seminal anthology New Writing in India in 1974 and has co-edited an anthology of Indian prose in 1977. Let us close read a few of his poems. These are not too long. The poem Sea Breeze in Bombay or Sea Breeze Bombay has Jasawala trying to script the history of the partition of India in 1947 and to make explicit the gruesome picture that such a tragedy unleashed in the political history of the country. Bombay in this poem is the microcosm of the Indian subcontinent that has registered both the colonial violence as well as the imperial policy of divide and rule. The poem also highlights the consequences of partition and the city's indifference to the migration problem. The poem is both a statement as well as a documentation of the still flickering trace of the colonial problem that has emanated since the partition. The poem begins with a horrendous image of death of an entire country which has paradoxically discovered itself anew with the partition that has engendered sectarianism throughout the country. The expression cut country is a vindication of the fractured, fragmented and divided sense of nationalism which has seeped into the rubric of Indian politics. Bombay is projected as the new hub to all sections of the people, striking and striving to eke out a living by building from the remains of a glorified nationhood. Bombay turns out essentially to be a migrant's city. The speaker also reflects upon the fluctuating nature of the formation of communities along sectarian lines that has become the hallmark of the Indian diaspora. Bombay still, in spite of all the political upheavals and social unrest, investigates nothing. Bombay reserves the right of offering a semblance of an abode, a home, to all her people, irrespective of their caste, color, creed, or nationality. The second poem that we are looking at is also something that features Bombay, the city. It is called Approaching Santa Cruz Airport, Bombay. This poem formulates a diasporic Indian identity. Now, the 20th century modernist angst, coupled with the failure to locate oneself in a particular geographical territory and the dilemma of the in-betweenness of spaces, are central issues in this poem. The tracing of roots of the Parsi Indians and the idea of an imaginary homelands are powerful debates that the entire trajectory of Jusawala's poetic voice tends to encounter. Jusawala is not a poet who talks about aesthetics. He is more a cultural and ideological fundamentalist in some sense, who speaks newer ways of perceiving identity in the light of the modern condition. And he typifies the quintessential poet of the Indian diaspora, basically because of his representation of a multi-layered identity. He is Gujarati born, Hindi speaking, Indian Parsi writing in English. The speaker in the poem invokes the Christian theological belief of the gestural cross in a rather cynical manner because it shows the contentment of the people with their present lives, irrespective of the fact that they reside in homes as live as disease. The expression, a union of homes as live as a disease, reflects the general standard of living of the people. The aeroplane is compared to papa, which is an indictment in some sense of papal authority. The speaker then comes down heavily upon the Indian political scenario that has copied the communist agenda of Chairman Mao. And then the idea of entrapment gains credence with the visualization of the speaker being caged not within any restricted spatial barrier, but something that is within. The graphic image of the slums sweeping beneath the wheels of the aeroplane is undoubtedly heartrending, yet at the same time gives the impression of how politicized the category of modernity itself can be. Having looked at two of the Bombay poems of Jusawala, we could try and link it up with his major work, Missing Person. Now, Missing Person is the poem that has Jusawala trying to fix his own identity, trying to fix the identity of many Indians who move from one state to another, from one country to another, the diasporic experience, the multifold ideas that seep into their identities via Western education, travel, reading of other cultures, and so on and so forth. So what we have then is, within a specific kind of geography, both our poems are on Bombay, you have multiple kinds of experiences that the poet is trying to bring in to bear on his ideas of history, of nation, and how both of these ideas finally help to shape the identity of the person that he speaks about. Let us now look at the work of Jayanta Mahapatra, who we have spoken about in other modules as well. Mahapatra, born in Cuttack in Orissa in 1928, has published prolifically in terms of both poetry and some amount of prose. What we find very interesting in Mahapatra's work is his bilingualism. In that sense, he has written both in Odia as well as in English, although we, for our purposes, have to concentrate on the work that he does in English, but must never forget that the Odia sensibility will always inform his English poetry as well. Now, apart from the poetry he published, he also has a few short stories and other prose pieces. The poem that will now be at the focus of our reading is called Dholi. Mahapatra seeks now to uphold the nefarious consequences of war and its horrors. He challenges the ideological status of war, that war which has gone down the pages of history as a hallmark of Indian valor. Hallmark of Indian valor is actually a questionable idea, and he questions it. Mahapatra adopts a subaltern standpoint in the spilling of the truce associated with warmongering and the resultant violence. He is questioning the integrity of an Indian past and employs the rhetorical mode. The image of the earth, along with the merciless worms, suggests the intensity of violence that persists even after death. The hunger of the dead bodies is a metaphorical assumption of that unattained hunger for power by those whose bodies have now become the edification of the earthworms. The expression limp genitals is couched in the form of a sexual metaphor to heighten the futility of war, as these organs are now lifeless and lie rotting in the graves, awaiting the arrival of the foxes. In the poem called Freedom, we have the pervading sense of a catastrophic political future, along with a subtle hint of the violated political climate, and it becomes apparent that this is Mahapatra's choice of imagery. The poem begins with the speaker's deep sense of frustration, on the assumption that the country drifts like a dead body on the placid water of the river, that the speaker's body is a half-disembodied bamboo is an instant reminder of the grotesqueness and political state that has endowed such an identity to such a place. The growth metaphor is again heightened by the idea of forging an identity conceived along the lines of a nation's historicity. The old widows and dying men represent the past and are therefore representatives of a time of political unrest. The past very dolefully makes its presence felt in the present. And it is this perpetual servitude of the Indian that intensifies the speaker's frustration. The poem is thus an indictment on the political atmosphere of the country that pays no heed to the masses and is often a dismal failure in creating a congenial atmosphere where freedom, liberty, and equality can be realized. Therefore, again, to sum up in this particular poem, you have Mahapatra's concerns of nation, of history, and of recalling all of this in terms of the migrants' experience. All of them come and have a special kind of bearing in the imagery that he brings out. The idea of history, for example, will very often be visualized in a specific kind of, say for example, in the half-disembodied bamboo image, where you have the waste of history in terms of a solid image. And that, in so many ways, is just one example of how Mahapatra has this intense poetic vision that he is able to replicate in poem after poem through images that speak for themselves. Let us now look at the work of Sarojini Naidu and how the three themes that we have identified run in her poetry. Naidu was born in 1978 in Hyderabad, and her early play, Maher Munir, impressed the Nizam of Hyderabad so much that he provided her with a scholarship to go on and study further abroad. Naidu's vast readings and inspirations from her father made her well versed in Hindu mythology and in Urdu and Persian folklore. But it was in England that she came under the enervating influence of her literary mentors, such as Arthur Symons and Edmund Gosse, who made it a point to give her the idea that her identity was her own, and it would be possible only if she was able to devote herself to contexts that are specific to her own origins. Both Symons and Gosse advised her to be a poet of the East and to bring the charm of the Indian panorama into her poetry. Her published works include The Golden Threshold in 1905, followed by the subsequent publications of The Bird of Time, The Broken Wings, The Magic Trees, The Wizard Mask, and A Treasury of Poems. In the poem entitled Ode to His Highness, the Nizam of Hyderabad, we have an encomium that is dedicated to the Nizam, whose reign marked the opulence of a community of people belonging to diverse religious faith. It begins with the word Deign, D-E-I-G-N, which is deliberately used by the speaker poet, as the speaker is quite doubtful whether her stature merits the privilege of paying homage to such a royal personality. The brand of civic nationalism that the speaker tries to highlight becomes evident in the mutual harmony of the people belonging to a diverse race and religion unified under the rule of the Nizam. Muslims, Hindu Brahmins, Parsis, Zoroastrians, Christians all cohabit and live peacefully. The court of the Nizam popularized transcultural interaction in the form of popularizing tales and fables from Baghdad. It also marked the rise of a new culture, freed from the rigorous prescriptions of conservatism and religious fundamentalism. Art and culture coexist with politics and mark the birth of a new era of transnationalism. But grim hills and ancient wild forests are all that have been left of the Nizam's legacy. The speaker is pained to witness the flagpost of the Nizam adorning the minarets of a ruined fort. The speaker concludes her homage with the belief that the Nizam's achievements might strike the right chords in the minds of the people and teach them about the necessity of living in mutual harmony as the only solid base for nationalism. Having looked at the works of Sarojini Naidu, who is probably the earliest poet who is considering ideas of history, of nation, and of politics in her works, we have moved to see how all of these three ideas work in terms of Jayanta Mahapatra's retelling of the notion of identity via these three ideas of history, nation, politics, how it affects the identity, and move on to the work of Jusawala, for whom all of these three issues are ingredients that serve to further render ambiguous what it means to be an Indian living in contemporary India, at least the India of his times. Thank you.